Part 19. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 181. Wei Lian knew that Chen Tao was leaving, so she waited for him outside Chen Tao early in the morning. Now that she heard that Chen Tao was leaving, she realized that she might not be able to contact Chen Tao, which made Wei Lian feel very uneasy and panicked. If Chen Tao left and never came back, and she couldn't contact Chen Tao, then everything would be over. Wei Lian didn't want to be separated from Chen Tao like this. Chen Tao looked at Wei Lian. He raised his hand, and there was a diamond-shaped pendant glowing blue in his hand. He handed the pendant to Wei Lian. Villia raised her hand and took it. Wei Lian looked at Chen Tao and said, "This is it?" Chen Tao said, "With the communicator, as long as you recite my name silently in your heart and talk to it, I can hear your voice." Wei Lian held the pendant in her hand, placed it on her heart, looked at Chen Tao and said, "I will keep it well and use it well." Hearing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly. Chen Tao pulled the reins, the lion eagle spread its wings, and the speed became faster. A miniature wormhole appeared ahead. The lion eagle turned its back to Chen Tao and He Yuxuan and entered the miniature wormhole. Look at the tiny wormhole that slowly closes. Villia controlled the griffin and hovered in mid-air. She opened her hand and looked at the diamond-shaped pendant placed on her palm. Her eyes were filled with a hint of splendor. She pursed her thin lips and slowly closed her hand. He withdrew his gaze and left with the griffin. Passing through the micro-wormhole, Chen Tao and He Yuxuan appeared in the protective cover of Base 1. The griffin flapped its wings and landed slowly on the deck. Chen Tao looked at He Yuxuan behind him. He Yuxuan turned over and got off the lion eagle. Chen Tao also turned over and fell down. He looked at the griffin beside him. "This thing looks like it should eat me," Chen Tao said to himself. "What is this?" a voice came from beside me. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao looked back and found Ziyiqing looking here. She had a sniper rifle in her hand. It seemed that she was practicing sniping here just now. Chen Tao said, "The griffin is a kind of flying mount. He Yuxuan and I went to other planets to play for a while. We thought this thing was interesting, so we brought it back." Ziyiqing's eyes lit up slightly, and she walked over. When she came to the lion eagle, she looked at the creature. This creature is as tall as an adult horse, but it has a strong body, wings, and looks very cool. Ziyiqing's eyebrows were glowing. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Tao, can you let me ride?" Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, "Of course." Chen Tao turned over and sat on the griffin, then stretched out his hand towards Ziyiqing. Ziyiqing placed it in Chen Tao's palm, and Chen Tao pulled it slightly. Pulling Ziyiqing up, Ziyiqing landed lightly on the lion eagle and slowly sat down. Chen Tao approached Ziyiqing and gently put one hand around her slender waist. He was close to Ziyiqing's hair and could smell the fragrance emanating from her hair. He said softly in her ear, "Hold the reins, and if you pull up, it will fly. If you pull it that way, it will fly that way." When Ziyiqing heard this, she pulled the reins and pulled her hand. The lion eagle flapped its wings and flew into the sky. Chen Tao said, "Base number 1, close the protective shield." "The shield is closed." The lion eagle flew out and flew into the blue sky. The wind suddenly hit my face. Ziyiqing's earrings lit up slightly and turned into a white light, falling in front of her eyes and turning into high-tech glasses. Chen Tao looked at Ziyiqing. Those glasses were for sniping, but now they can block the wind that irritates the glasses. Ziyiqing held the griffin's hand and whispered, "Hurry up." The griffin's wings flapped violently, its speed became faster, and it roared madly. Ziyiqing's face rose slightly. Chen Tao looked at the smile on Ziyiqing's beautiful face, and Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. He almost forgot that when Ziyiqing took Chen Tao's car for the first time, she was very sensitive to speed. The faster she was, the happier she was. Ziyiqing likes speed. Sitting on the back of the griffin, feeling the wind coming towards her face, for Zicheng, this speed is naturally her favorite. Chen Tao smiled and his eyes fell on Zicheng. Zicheng is wearing a black outfit that fits Zicheng's figure. Her waist is slender, her back is slender, and her shoulders are round and slender. She had previously cut her hair short to facilitate movement, revealing her slender and fair neck. Very beautiful Zicheng. Chen Tao gently held Zicheng's waist, and he could completely feel the slenderness of her waist. The female dragon's body is very tall due to the influence of genes. But Zicheng is not bad either. Compared with ordinary girls, Zicheng is already very tall. Moreover, Zicheng has a mature figure, but among the women around Chen Tao, only Rose can compare with Zicheng in terms of bust size. Zicheng is still very cute. Chen Tao said with a smile, "If you like it, I'll give it to you." Zicheng was slightly startled. She turned back to look at Chen Tao. Her eyes were filled with a hint of luster and she said, "Really?" Chen Tao smiled, "Of course, but there is a condition." "Conditions? What conditions?" Zicheng was a little happy, but when she heard Chen Tao mention the conditions, she was a little confused. Chen Tao looked into Zicheng's eyes, he smiled, raised his hand and gently touched her cheek, and said with a smile, "You have been busy training during this period. Give yourself a day off tomorrow. Stop training and stay with me one day." When she heard this, Zicheng's eyes shone with a gleam, and she smiled and said, "Yeah." The purpose of her training was actually to be with Chen Tao. Now that Chen Tao wanted to accompany him with her, she was of course very happy. Zicheng said, "Then let's go back first." "Okay." Zicheng pulled her hand, and the lion eagle turned around and flew back to base number 1. Back home. The lion eagle landed on the deck. Chen Tao got off the lion eagle's back, took Zicheng's hand, and brought Zicheng down with him. Zicheng stood beside Chen Tao, and she looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao approached Zicheng, gently hugged her, gently stroked her cheek, looked into her eyes, and smiled softly, saying, "Don't train today, go to my room, and let's do something we like." Zicheng was slightly startled, her face slightly reddened, pursed her thin lips, and said, "Yeah." Chen Tao hugged Zicheng's shoulders and took her to the room. The next day, after Chen Tao and Zicheng had played at home for a night, Zicheng suggested that they go to the slums to take a look. Chen Tao knew that Zicheng might be homesick. He naturally agreed to Zicheng. The two returned to the slums. Walking on the familiar street, Chen Tao looked at the slums. The buildings were dilapidated, and the people next to them were busy. The slums looked the same as usual. Chen Tao looked at Zicheng and said with a smile, let's go to your house." Yeah, Zicheng nodded slightly, with expectation in her eyes. After all, she had been away for so long. Accompanying Zicheng to her former home, the door was closed. Zicheng didn't bring the key, but it didn't matter. Chen Tao raised his hand, and there was an extra key in it. He inserted the key into the door and opened it. Creaking. The door slowly opened. Chen Tao accompanied Zicheng into the house. As soon as he entered the house, the scene he saw made Chen Tao frown. There were two men sitting in the living room. The two men saw Chen Tao and Zicheng coming in. They stood up quickly and looked at each other. One of them stared at Chen Tao and Zicheng and said, "Who are you two? Why did you break into my house?" Chen Tao was startled. "Their house. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 182. Chen Tao looked at Zicheng, who was a little confused. Chen Tao looked at the living room. Chen Tao has been to Zicheng's home before. This is Zicheng's home, and that's right. Chen Tao looked at the two men and said, "What you are saying should be what we want to ask you. What do you want to do when you stay in our house?" The two men looked at each other. The two frowned, and one of the men gave the other a look. A man walked into the house. Another man stood in front of Chen Tao and Zicheng. He looked at them and said, "That's nonsense. Someone else sold this house to us. Why did it become your house?" The man's face was indifferent, his eyes looked at Zicheng and then at Chen Tao. He was a little panicked when Chen Tao and Zicheng appeared, but now he seems to be calm and calm. "You are talking nonsense." Zicheng got angry and said, "This is the house my mother left me. I have lived here for more than 10 years. During this time, we went out and saw you as soon as we came back." Zicheng said, "Get out of here, or I will call the people from Hong Tao's organization." Even Zicheng, who has always been calm, couldn't help it. This is her home. This is not the same as before. If something goes wrong, you can definitely go to Hong Tao's organization. As soon as he heard about the Hong Tao organization, the man's face became a little uneasy. He frowned suddenly and said, "The Hong Tao organization, huh, I'm afraid you won't be able to find them with your life." "What do you mean?" Zicheng was slightly startled. "I mean, you two don't even think about getting out of this house alive." A voice came from another direction. Chen Tao and Zicheng looked over there and saw the man who had just entered the back room walking out of the room. The man held a pistol in his hand. He raised his hand and pointed the gun at Chen Tao. Seeing this, Chen Tao finally understood. This man had just entered the house to get a gun. The man squinted his eyes and pulled the trigger suddenly. The bullet was shot from the silencer of the gun and shot into Chen Tao's head. Chiang! There was a crisp sound, a burst of fire lit up on Chen Tao's head, and the bullet fell to the ground. Seeing this, the expressions of the two men changed slightly. "What's going on?" The man holding the gun looked a little surprised. "Don't worry, shoot. Shoot quickly." Another man turned pale and shouted quickly. The man with the gun fired again. Puff! The muzzle of the gun that hit the silencer made a sharp sound when it fired the bullet. 3 bullets were fired at Chen Tao. Chen Tao raised his hand and the bullet disappeared into thin air. "Where are the bullets?" The man holding the gun was stunned. Chen Tao opened his hands and bullets fell to the ground. Ba bang bang. The bullet fell to the ground and fell to the hard floor, and the sound was particularly clear. The expressions of the two men changed, and they swallowed. "Run!" they suddenly shouted. The two of them didn't dare to stay any longer and hurriedly fled out the door. With the thought in Chen Tao's mind, a miniature wormhole opened. A silver rope emerged and quickly tied the two into a ball. The two fell to the ground. The pistol fell to the ground. Chen Tao walked up to the two of them. He picked up the pistol, walked to the sofa aside and sat down. He looked at the two people who were twisting and struggling on the ground, trying to break free from the rope, and said, "You guys, what are their names?" "Let me go, let me go," the inch-haired man shouted loudly. Chen Tao frowned. It seemed that these two guys were not going to answer the question obediently. Chen Tao raised the pistol in his hand and pointed the muzzle at the head of one of the men. The man noticed Chen Tao's movements and his face turned pale. "No, no." The bullet passed through the man's head. The man's whole body was shaken. There was a hole in his head. His eyes were closed and there was no movement. When another man saw this scene, his face was as pale as a sheet of paper. "Mu Hai." Chen Tao pointed the muzzle of his pistol at the remaining men. The man turned pale and said, "Don't kill me, don't kill me. You ask, no matter what you ask, I will answer. As long as you don't kill me." Chen Tao retracted his gun and said calmly, "What's your name?" The man swallowed and said, "My name is Mu Hui." Chen Tao looked at Zicheng beside him, who looked at the scene indifferently. Although Chen Tao killed someone in front of her, Zicheng didn't care at all. Even the kind-hearted Zicheng didn't want to care about the life and death of the people who wanted to occupy her home and kill them. Chen Tao withdrew his gaze, looked at Mu Hui, and said, "This is my lover's home. Why do you and him live here?" Mu Hui said nervously, "I didn't know this was your home. The two of us just moved in because there was no one here. I just didn't expect you to come back." Hearing this, Chen Tao finally understood. It turned out that they wanted to take over other people's homes because they saw no one was there. Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "Okay, I understand. You can go with your brother without any worries." He pointed his gun at Mu Hui. When Mu Hui saw it, his face turned pale. "Didn't you say you wouldn't kill me?" Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and he said, "I never said this, you just said it to yourself." Mu Hui was stunned. The bullet passed through Mu Hui's head. A bullet hole was left in Mu Hui's head. Mu Hui lay on the ground, motionless. After a while, the two bodies turned into molecules and slowly dissipated in the air, as if they had evaporated from the world. Chen Tao didn't want their bodies to pollute Ziking's home. The pistol in Chen Tao's hand also disappeared. Chen Tao stood up and looked at Ziking, who was standing aside in a daze. Chen Tao slowly walked behind Ziking, gently hugged Ziking's petite body, hugged her completely in his arms, and said, "The trouble has been solved, it's okay." As he said, he kissed her cheek. Feeling Chen Tao's tenderness, Ziking's mood slowly relaxed a little. She pursed her lips and said, "These people are really too much." "Is it too much? They occupied someone else's home after they left for a while, and even wanted to shoot the real owner when the real owner came back. This is more than excessive." Chen Tao said, "That's normal. After all, this is a slum." Ziyi Qing nodded slightly and said, "That's right. I thought I was used to the things in the slum, but it's still hard to accept when I encounter it again. If these two people were not facing us today, but those ordinary people." Chen Tao looked at Ziyi Qing's little face and her sad eyes. Chen Tao smiled, stretched out his hand, turned Ziyi Qing around, and the two faced each other. Chen Tao looked into Ziyi Qing's eyes and said with a smile, "But, today they are facing us. So their death is their own fault. The death of the two scumbags means that we have saved a lot of people." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 183. Ziyi Qing hummed, slowly snuggled into Chen Tao's arms, and slowly closed her eyes. Chen Tao gently stroked Ziyi Qing's hair. Chen Tao didn't expect that something like this would happen just after returning home to the slums. There is no way, after all this is a slum area. He comforted Ziyi Qing. Dong dong dong. The two of them hadn't been warm for long before there was a knock on the door. "Mu Hui, are you there?" Hearing the sound coming from outside the door, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and he looked at Ziyi Qing. Ziyi Qing was slightly startled. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. The two looked at each other. "Mu Hui, get out of here. The time you owe me hasn't been counted yet. Don't think you'll be fine just hiding at home." A girl's voice came from outside the door. But the voice was not so polite. Chen Tao was a little depressed. It seemed that Mu Hui and the two guys not only regarded this as their home, but even told others that this was their home. Chen Tao looked at Ziyi Qing and said, "I'll go take a look." Ziyi Qing nodded slightly. Chen Tao let go of Ziyi Qing, walked to the door, and opened it. Once opened, Chen Tao saw a little girl who was dressed in unique and revealing clothes. When the little girl saw a stranger coming out, her eyes were filled with confusion and she said, "Who are you? Where is Mu Hui?" Chen Tao said, "The original owner of my house, Mu Hui, has been killed by me." When the little sister heard this, she said, "Dead." She was a little confused. She frowned, crossed her arms, and said, "Oh, I know, you were called by Mu Hui." You want to scare me, don't you? I, Li Qiao, am so scared. I owe you time, and I don't want to come back said, right. After Li Qiao finished speaking, he went directly into the house. Chen Tao stretched out his hand and stopped Li Qiao. Li Qiao was startled and looked at Chen Tao, get out of the way and let me in. Chen Tao looked at the girl and said, I told you, he is dead. This house is not his in the first place. We have taken the house back. We have nothing to do with you, please leave. When the girl heard this, she frowned and said, oh, here comes the trick again. Okay, you said, you killed him, right? Then kill my aunt too. If you dare to kill my aunt will believe you. How are you? She yelled and moved closer to Chen Tao. She was convinced that Chen Tao didn't dare to take action. Chen Tao frowned and had a pistol in his hand, pointing the gun at Li Qiao. When Li Qiao saw the muzzle of the gun, her expression changed slightly and she subconsciously took a step back. She calmed down a little, looked at Chen Tao, and said, you shoot me. Her face turned pale and she was a little scared, but her mouth was not forgiving at all. You shoot, aim at my head, Li Qiao said angrily, if I can't take back this time, then I will die. Since I am going to die, then let me die here. This woman is really unreasonable. Li Qiao, suddenly, Chen Tao heard a voice behind him. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao looked at Ziyi Qing beside him. Ziyi Qing came over and looked at Li Qiao. Li Qiao also saw Ziyi Qing, and the two looked at each other. Li Qiao was slightly startled, Ziyi Qing. When Ziyi Qing saw Li Qiao, she had a smile on her face and said, when I heard your voice inside just now, I was a little unsure, but now I am sure. There was a smile on Li Qiao's face. Why are you here? You left the bar a while ago, and then there was no news from you. I thought I would never see you again. Seeing this, Chen Tao put away his pistol. Unexpectedly, this girl also knew Ziyi Qing. However, it is not surprising that this ghetto is not that big. Ziyi Qing said with a smile, I have been away for a while and I have just returned home. This is my home. Li Qiao was startled, is this your home? Ziyi Qing nodded slightly. Li Qiao's face turned slightly pale. She leaned against the wall in despair and said, so, what this man said is true. Then what should I do? I will definitely die. Li Qiao covered his head with both hands, looking in pain. Ziyi Qing looked at the change in Li Qiao's face. There was a trace of doubt in her eyes and she said, what's wrong? Li Qiao bit his lower lip and said, that's not Mu Hui, that beast. I dated him before and he defrauded me of a lot of time. I borrowed that time from Brother Long. Now he has broken up with me. As a result, time has not been given back to me. The time limit is coming. If I don't return it to Brother Long, I will be finished. Li Qiao's face turned pale, his expression was a bit ugly, and his eyes were filled with tears. Brother Long? Chen Tao remembered that he was the guy who had thoughts about Ziyi Qing before. Is that guy still doing this? Ziyi Qing looked at Li Qiao's helpless look. Ziyi Qing was slightly startled, she pursed her lips and said, how much time did you borrow from Brother Long? Li Qiao grimaced and said, I don't know what happened for a whole year. My head was stuck in the door. I actually believed in a scum like Mu Hui. Ziyi Qing looked at Li Qiao and said, it's okay. I'll give you this year. Chen Tao was not surprised at all when he heard what Ziyi Qing said. Ziyi Qing's character is very kind. Now she has unlimited lifespan and unlimited time. With such abilities, it is normal for her to choose to help others. What's more, Li Qiao knew her. Li Qiao was slightly startled. She looked at Ziking, her eyes shone with a hint of light. Really? That's a year. For people in the slums, a month's income is only 50 or 60 days. This year, that is not a small amount of money. Ziking nodded slightly, She smiled and said, "Give me your hand." Li Qiao's eyes showed a trace of disbelief. She raised her hand and handed it to Ziking. Ziking put her wrist on top of Li Qiao's wrist. There were only 2 days left on Li Qiao's wrist. And at this moment, the time on Li Qiao's wrist was increasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Li Qiao's eyes were shown with a trace of doubt. Not long after, the time on Li Qiao's wrist increased by 2 years. Ziking took her hand back. Li Qiao looked at the time on her wrist. She couldn't help but look at Ziking and said, "Why 2 years?" Ziking said, "You only have 2 days left. If I don't give you more time, you will be in danger after 2 days. You can return it to Brother Long in that year, and you can use the rest of the time for yourself." Li Qiao looked at Ziking and said, "But I don't think I can pay you back with so much time." Hearing this, Ziking smiled and said, "No need to pay it back." Li Qiao was stunned. "No need to pay it back." Ziking nodded slightly and said, "We were colleagues before, and colleagues should help each other. This is what we should do." Li Qiao's eyes were shining with water, and she hummed, "Thank you, Ziking. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 184. Zicheng smiled slightly and said, "Then the matter is settled. How about you come to my house and have a cup of tea?" Li Qiao shook her head. She wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and said, "No, I'll return the money to Brother Long first. I'll pay back the money I owe first. That's more important. I'll come back later." Yeah, Zicheng nodded slightly. Zicheng watched Li Qiao skipping away. Looking at Li Qiao's cheerful pace, Zicheng also had a smile on her face. Chen Tao approached Zicheng and gently held her shoulders. Feeling Chen Tao's tenderness, Zicheng looked at Chen Tao and said, "It's really magical." Chen Tao gently stroked her arm and said with a smile, "What's so magical?" Zicheng smiled and said, "When I was at base number 1, I always felt that I was very ordinary, and compared to Rose and Lin, I felt that I was inferior to them. But here, I discovered that I already have ordinary people. Something you can't have anymore. Infinite time," my beloved man Zicheng said. "In this slum, I remembered how poor and down and out I used to be." Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, "There is still time now. Would you like to go to the Red Dragon Bar?" Zicheng was slightly startled. She raised her face, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Do you want to go?" Chen Tao smiled, "Isn't it interesting to revisit the old place?" Hearing this, Zicheng had a smile on her face and said, "Okay, I'll close the door first." Chen Tao nodded slightly. Zicheng closed the door. Chen Tao gently hugged Zicheng's slender waist and walked with Zicheng towards the Red Dragon Bar. The Red Dragon Bar is not far from here, it only takes about 10 minutes to walk. Go halfway. Zicheng snuggled next to Chen Tao, feeling Chen Tao next to her, and a smile appeared on her face. Although she was walking on the old street in the slum area, Zicheng felt as if she was walking on the Avenue of Stars. It felt good because she had her beloved man by her side. Suddenly, Chen Tao noticed 3 men standing in the corner in front of him. One was leaning against the wall with both hands, and the other 2 were standing nearby, looking over here. Seeing Chen Tao and Zicheng approaching, they stared at Chen Tao and Zicheng. Seeing this, Chen Tao didn't think much and took Zicheng forward. The 3 of them suddenly walked out and stood in front of Chen Tao and Zicheng. "The road is blocked." Chen Tao looked at the 3 people in front of him. One of the bald men walked out. He took out a switchblade from his trouser pocket and played with it by himself. He stared directly at Chen Tao and said, "Give me your time, and we will let you go." He squinted. Chen Tao looked at the bald man, and he looked at what he was wearing. In an instant, Chen Tao understood. The clothes Chen Tao and Zicheng wore were relatively high-tech. You could tell at a glance that they were valuable clothes. It would be strange not to be noticed when you were walking around in a slum area wearing valuable clothes. Chen Tao looked at the bald man. He looked closely and found that the bald man looked familiar. Isn't this guy the same bald guy who was beaten by Chen Tao last time? After such a long time, I didn't expect that he would still go back to his old business. Zicheng looked at Chen Tao beside her. Chen Tao looked at the bald man and said, "It doesn't matter if you need time, but you need a life. Come and get it if you can." The bald man frowned and said, "I don't know whether to live or die. Come on." After saying that, he walked up to Chen Tao and stabbed Chen Tao's ribs with the switchblade in his hand. There was a sound of flesh and blood being separated. An arm flew into the air. The bald man's face was as pale as paper. He took 2 steps back. He looked at his broken arm and the blood coming out. His face was pale, and he stared at Chen Tao and said, "What did you do?" 2 voices sounded in unison. Bang bang. The bald man was slightly startled. He turned his face and saw that the 2 companions beside him were broken into 2 pieces and fell to the ground. The bald man's face was as pale as a sheet of paper. He turned around and hurriedly walked out. Suddenly, a silver rope appeared and tied the bald man's feet. The bald man fell to the ground. He looked at Chen Tao in horror. "Who are you? What have you done?" Next to Chen Tao, the half-moon blade was spinning slowly. He looked at the bald man and said lightly, "I didn't expect that you have robbed me twice and you still haven't recognized me." The bald man was slightly startled. He stared at Chen Tao. His pupils condensed slightly and said, "It's you. You're the guy at the Red Dragon bar last time." Chen Tao's eyebrows slightly stretched, and he said, "Except for that time at the Red Dragon bar, here, at the same place, you also stabbed my ribs with your knife." The bald man's eyes moved. He looked at Zicheng beside Chen Tao, and then at Chen Tao. It's you? How is it possible? Were you not dead at that time?" He recognized Chen Tao, his face changed slightly, and his eyes were full of disbelief. Chen Tao said, "Now that you recognize it, it will be easy to handle." Chen Tao said, "You robbed me twice, and I endured both times, but this time, I'm sorry, your death has come. If a person like you who refuses to change after repeated admonitions is kept, he will harm others, so go and die." "No," the bald man cried out in horror. A head rolled to the ground. The half-moon blade enters the micro-wormhole. Chen Tao looked at Zicheng beside him. Zicheng's expression did not change at all. She looked at Chen Tao. Eyes facing each other. Chen Tao said, "I'm sorry for letting you see this scene." Zicheng pursed her lower lip, showed a smile, and said, "It's nothing." It seems that Zicheng is used to it. Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "Let's go." The 2 of them continued to walk forward, bypassing the bald man's body and heading towards the Red Dragon bar. "Come to the door of the Red Dragon bar." Chen Tao looked at the familiar Red Dragon bar in front of him, his eyebrows slightly stretched, and he walked into the Red Dragon bar. He was about to go in when suddenly an arm was stretched across Chen Tao's body. Chen Tao was slightly startled and looked at the people around him. This man was a fat man. The man was tall, about 1.8 meters tall. He stood up and lay in front of Chen Tao. He looked at Chen Tao and said, "The new rules of the Red Dragon bar are that people who enter must be charged time. If you want to go in, you have to give it 10 days. Chen Tao frowned slightly. Chen Tao looked next to him and saw someone walking into the Red Dragon bar, but the man ignored those people and just stared at Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at the man and said, "Why don't others have to pay time?" The man gave a sneer, then faded his smile and said, "Because I think you're unhappy, they can go in, but you have to pay time to go in, do you understand?" "Oh, Chen Tao understands, this guy is here to cause trouble for Chen Tao on purpose." My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 185. Why did this guy not pick on others, but on Chen Tao? The reason is not hard to know. The Red Dragon Bar is a bar located in the slums. Most people in this bar are at the bottom of society. The way Chen Tao and Ziking dress is different from the people here. Many people in the slums have a hatred of the rich and cannot see anyone better than themselves. This guy is obviously that kind of person. This is probably why he came to pick on Chen Tao. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, he looked at the man, and said lightly, "What if I don't pay the time?" The man stood with his arms folded, staring at Chen Tao playfully, and said, "If you don't pay, then don't even think about going in." Hearing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and his feet lifted. Bang! With a muffled sound, the man's body, which was nearly 200 kilograms, flew out, just like a ball, and hit the glass door of the Red Dragon Bar heavily. The glass door shattered. The man flew out and pulled 10 meters on the ground before he stopped. The man's stomach sunken down, his face turned pale, he struggled to get up, covered his stomach with his hands, opened his mouth, and spurted out a mouthful of blood. His eyes stared at Chen Tao. "You, this guy." At this time, a group of people suddenly ran out and surrounded Chen Tao and Ziking. Those people were probably the man's companions. After the group of guys surrounded Chen Tao and Ziking, one of them looked at the man and said, "Zin, what's wrong?" At a glance, he found that the man had closed his eyes and fainted. Seeing this, the man's face changed slightly, he looked at Chen Tao and said, "Stinky boy, dare to touch my Lin Hu's people." Lin Hu pulled out a pistol from his waist and pointed the gun at Chen Tao. Suddenly, a silver light flashed. Lin Hu's arm holding the gun broke into two pieces, and the broken arm holding the pistol fell to the ground. Pop! A light sound. "Ah!" Lin Hu screamed, blood spurted out of his broken arm, and his face was as pale as paper. Lin Hu retreated in horror and sat on the ground. He said, "My hand, my hand." Brother Hu, the group of people next to him changed their faces when they saw Lin Hu's appearance. Lin Hu covered his broken arm tightly with his hand and said, "What are you still looking at? Come on, kill him for me." He stared at Chen Tao fiercely, his eyes full of murderous intent and hatred. When the group of people saw and heard Lin Hu say this, they looked at each other, but no one dared to step forward easily. Because around Chen Tao, there was a strange half-moon-shaped weapon surrounding him. They all knew that it was very likely that the weapon had cut off Lin Hu's arm just now, but the problem was that they didn't know how the man in front of them did it just now. This was incredible. They were also human beings, and naturally they were afraid of ending up like Lin Hu, and they didn't dare to step forward. Chen Tao looked at the people surrounding him and said calmly, "We are going to go into the Red Dragon Bar and take a look. If you want to die, just keep blocking us. I'll give you 3 seconds. If you are still standing here in 3 seconds, you will bear the consequences. 3, 2. The thugs who were watching Chen Tao looked a little uneasy, and some of them stepped back subconsciously. "Assholes, what are you afraid of? Can this guy kill you all?" Lin Hu roared. "If you don't do it, I will let Brother Long kill you all." Hearing Lin Hu's voice, the thugs hesitated for a moment, but during this hesitation, Chen Tao's voice also fell. 1. The half-moon blade turned and circled around Chen Tao. One after another, the bodies that were broken into two fell to the ground, and the blood slowly flowed out. Lin Hu looked at this scene, his face was as pale as paper, his pupils trembled, looking at Chen Tao's figure, his eyes were full of disbelief. "Devil, devil, devil." A flash of silver light. Lin Hu's head also fell off his neck and rolled to the ground. He could see his body slowly falling. His pupils trembled, and the luster inside slowly dissipated. He never expected that he would die here inexplicably. Chen Tao glanced at the corpses around him. He killed so many people in an instant. If it was in the past, Chen Tao didn't even dare to think about it, but now he didn't even blink. Why? Chen Tao didn't know why he had such a change, but since he had changed, he could only accept it. Swish. Suddenly someone ran out of the Red Dragon bar. The leader was an acquaintance, the manager of the Red Dragon bar, Red Dragon. Red Dragon brought a group of people. He looked around, looked at the corpses on the ground, and looked at Chen Tao. Hong Long frowned. It's you. Hong Long had not forgotten Chen Tao. He had lost a duel with Chen Tao before, and he had a deep impression of Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, "It's me." Hong Long frowned, looked at the corpses, then looked at Chen Tao and said, "What's going on? Are you planning to come here to seek revenge?" Hearing this, Chen Tao said, "No, I just went back to my hometown and wanted to take my wife back to the old place for a walk. Simply put, I came to the Red Dragon bar to spend money, but these people blocked my way and said they wanted to kill me. I had to defend myself, and they died accidentally." Accidentally? Hong Long was silent for a while, and his eyebrows slightly frowned. "You are too arrogant, you bastard." The man next to him came out with a machete. He pointed the knife at Chen Tao and said, "You killed our people on the territory of our Red Dragon bar, and you said you were careless." Then the man looked at Hong Long and said, "Brother Long, leave this kid to me. Chu Hao, will be chopped by him immediately with a knife." When Hong Long heard this, he raised his hand and slapped Chu Hao's head hard. Chu Hao was beaten and took a step back. His face was dazed, and he covered his forehead with his hands, looking at Hong Long. "Brother Long." Hong Long frowned and yelled, "Do you want to die? Didn't you see the corpse on the ground? Do you want to become a corpse?" Chu Hao was stunned for a moment. Hong Long looked at Chen Tao and said, "So that's the case. This matter is their stupidity, and they deserve to die. However, no matter what, they are also my people. They are powerless against you. As a big brother, I apologize to you. Please forgive them." For a while, everyone around was a little confused. This brother Long saw his men being killed, but not only did he not attack the other party, but he also apologized to the other party. This is too surprising. What's going on? Chen Tao looked at this man called Hong Long. It's no wonder that this man can build a Red Dragon bar in a place like the slums and still stand firm. He is very smart. If he directly fights Chen Tao now, then the Red Dragon bar will have to change people. He was smart not to do anything. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 186. Chen Tao said, "They have already paid the corresponding price for their rudeness, so you don't need to apologize." Hong Long nodded slightly. He looked at Chen Tao and said, "Then, please go in and play. I will wash the floor at the gate." Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "Yes." He looked at Zi Cheng. Zi Cheng slowly walked to Chen Tao and took Chen Tao's arm. Chen Tao accompanied Zi Cheng into the bar. Chu Hao approached the Red Dragon and said, "Brother Long, why are there so many people? There are only 2 of them. Why don't we take action?" Hong Long frowned, glanced at Chu Hao, and said coldly, "I need you to teach me how to do things." The corners of Chu Hao's mouth twitched, and he slowly lowered his head and said, "I don't dare, it's just Brother Long, those brothers will be dissatisfied." Red Dragon snorted, "If they don't accept it, get out of here. If he dares to kill so many of our brothers in a row, he must be sure that he will not fall behind when he fights with us. And you know that he killed Lin Hu with the weapon what?" Hong Long looked at Chu Hao and said, "You don't know anything, so aren't you afraid that you will be like them, split into 2 pieces, and lie on the ground?" Chu Hao was slightly startled, and he said, "Yes, Brother Long is still thoughtful, but I am too stupid." There was a cold sweat on his forehead. Hong Long snorted coldly. He looked at the direction Chen Tao was leaving and said, "Go down and tell our people to stay away from him. If you don't want to die, don't provoke him. Take good care of him tonight. Let's talk about other things after he leaves." Okay, Chu Hao nodded repeatedly. Other side. Chen Tao entered the Red Dragon Bar. Outside the Red Dragon Bar, many people died, but inside the Red Dragon Bar it was still very lively. I guess these people don't know what's going on outside. Chen Tao was too lazy to think too much. He took Ziyiqing and sat down at a table, minding his own business. Chen Tao could hear the loud music in the bar and the passionate roars of the guests. In addition, Chen Tao can also smell the smell of alcohol. Chen Tao raised his face and looked at the young men and women who were wearing scantily clad clothes and twisting their waists on the dance floor. He felt that his blood was boiling. He withdrew his gaze and looked at Ziyiqing beside him. Ziyiqing looked over there with a glint in her eyes, as if she was lost in memories. She was also a dancer here before. It's her job to dance here every day and create an atmosphere. Ziyiqing noticed Chen Tao's gaze and looked at Chen Tao. Eyes facing each other. Chen Tao smiled, "Want to go up and dance?" Upon hearing this, Ziyiqing shook her head and said with a smile, "I told you, my dance is only for you to watch." Chen Tao smiled, "Well, you can give me a nice dance when you get home later." When Ziyiqing heard this, she blushed slightly and nodded slightly, "Okay. What do you want?" At this time, a voice came. Chen Tao came back to his senses, raised his head and saw that he was an acquaintance. Li Qiao. When Li Qiao looked at Chen Tao and Ziyiqing, she smiled and said, "Why is it you? Are you here too?" Ziyiqing smiled and said, "Well, it's rare for me to go home, so I came to the place where I used to work to take a look. What about you? Do you still have time?" Li Qiao shook his head and said, "Not yet. Brother Long doesn't have much time. I also have to work. I want to talk about it after work. So what are you two planning to drink?" Chen Tao said, "Just have 2 beers." He was not particular about what he drank, just casually. "Is it casual?" Li Qiao smiled and said, "Okay." She walked toward the front desk. Chen Tao looked around. Chen Tao personally prefers quietness, but he doesn't like places like bars that much. For Chen Tao, a bar is a place to relax, rather than a place to vent his desires and relax. The women here take advantage of this crazy atmosphere to show off their assets unbridled. If you are stared at by the man next to you and the two of you fall in love, then tonight will be another story. The reason why Chen Tao didn't come to the bar often before was that he didn't have time and he didn't like the atmosphere. At this time, Chen Tao noticed that not far away, a young man in a white suit was walking towards him. He was holding a glass of red wine in his hand, looking directly at Ziyiqing, and stepped closer to Ziyiqing. Seeing this man, Chen Tao saw in his eyes a look that only men could understand. It was obvious that this man was attracted to Ziyiqing. However, Chen Tao was not surprised. Ziyiqing was always first-rate in terms of figure and appearance. After upgrading her genes, while her body genes were strengthened, her skin appearance and figure also changed slightly. She became more enchanting and charming. When you come to a messy place like a bar, it's normal for someone to stare at Ziyiqing. Chen Tao didn't care that much, he just sat quietly and watched what the guy planned to do. The guy came over, put the wine glass on the table, then pulled up a chair and sat in front of the table. His eyes fell on Ziyiqing, he smiled and said, "Beauty, what do you call her?" It's an old trick to strike up a conversation as soon as he comes over, but daring to strike up a conversation like this means that he is very confident in himself. It's normal for him to be confident, because this man is quite handsome, and with his attire, you can tell he has some financial resources. Zicheng didn't like being talked to, so she glanced at the man and looked at Chen Tao. The man noticed Ziking's gaze, and he looked at Chen Tao. He smiled and said, "Let me introduce myself first. My name is Zhang Lin. You have heard of Zhang Group, right? The president of Zhang Group is my father." He looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, "Is this woman yours?" Chen Tao did not intend to pay attention to this man named Zhang Lin. He did not even look at Zhang Lin. "The wine is here." Li Qiao came over just in time. She held the wine and placed it in front of Chen Tao and Ziking. Chen Tao took a look at the wine in front of him, picked up the glass and took a sip. Chen Tao had drunk the wine from Kayada. Compared with the wine there, the beer here was as light as water. Seeing that Chen Tao ignored him, Zhang Lin's eyebrows stretched slightly. He smiled and said, "I can pay 20 years to buy your woman. As long as you give your woman to me for 1 day, she will be yours for 20 years. Chen Tao frowned, and he turned his head to look at Zhang Lin. Zhang Lin noticed the change in Chen Tao's expression. He smiled and said, 20 years is not enough, how about 50 years? Chen Tao stood up, holding a wine glass in his hand, and poured the wine glass directly on his face. Chen Tao raised his foot and kicked Zhang Lin in the stomach. Zhang Lin's body flew out and knocked over a table and chairs. "Ah!" Someone next to him exclaimed. Fighting directly in this bar is different from fighting outside the bar. Once fighting, the eyes of people inside looked over here one by one. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 187. I am Zhang Lin, the son of the president of Zhang Group. You dare to touch me? Zhang Lin struggled to get up. His face was extremely ugly. He covered his chest tightly with his hand and supported the table next to him with his other hand. He stared at Chen Tao. Zhang Lin stood up and looked at Chen Tao with hatred. Being kicked down in front of so many people was very embarrassing, which made Zhang Lin feel very embarrassed. He looked around and suddenly his eyes caught Hong Long standing beside him. At first glance, his eyes lit up and he said, "Brother Long, come and help me. This guy is causing trouble in your store and dares to take action." It's great for Zhang Lin that Hong Long is here. He has a certain friendship with Hong Long. In this place, Zhang Lin dares to walk sideways because he has Hong Long as a backer. When he saw Hong Long, Zhang Lin was more confident. He thought that when Hong Long took action, he would let the bastard in front of him taste his power. On the contrary, when Hong Long heard Zhang Lin's words, he frowned slightly, then turned around and left with his men. Seeing this scene, Zhang Lin was stunned. "Brother Long." Hong Long ignored Zhang Lin and left on his own. Looking at Hong Long's back, Zhang Lin was a little confused for a while. What's going on? At this time, Chen Tao stepped closer to Zhang Lin. Seeing Chen Tao getting closer, Zhang Lin's expression changed slightly. What do you want to do?" Chen Tao had a pistol in his hand, and the muzzle was pointed at Zhang Lin's forehead. He said, "Kneel down and apologize, or die here." Upon hearing this, Zhang Lin was stunned. Looking at the black muzzle in front of him, the confidence he had just raised suddenly softened like a deflated ball. He hurriedly said, I apologize, I apologize." Hearing this, Chen Tao narrowed his eyes and said, "Do you know where you are wrong?" Zhang Lin was stunned. He shook his head. "No. I don't know." Bang! A gunshot. The bullet penetrated Zhang Lin's shoulder. Ah! A scream sounded. Zhang Lin covered his shoulder, his face was pale, and the whole person fell to the ground. My shoulder, my shoulder." Chen Tao said, "You shouldn't treat my woman as an object. The humiliation of her is also a humiliation to me." Chen Tao was very unhappy. He came to the Red Dragon bar just to walk around, drink and see the scenery. But unexpectedly, there were always a few guys who didn't know how to live or die. More importantly, this guy wanted to buy Ziking in front of Chen Tao. Buying means that Zhang Lin treats Ziking as an object. It can be said that he humiliated Ziking in front of Chen Tao. This made Chen Tao very unhappy. Zhang Lin cried and shouted, "I was wrong, I was wrong. I won't dare to do it again, please forgive me. I was wrong." He cried and shouted, holding his shoulder tightly. Looking at Zhang Lin's face with snot and tears. Chen Tao moved the pistol. Bang, another gunshot. Ah, Zhang Lin screamed, his eyes rolled back, and he fainted. Chen Tao did not kill Zhang Lin, but shot him through the thigh. Zhang Lin lost one hand and one leg. He did not know whether he lost too much blood or was too frightened, but fainted. Chen Tao was too lazy to think about it, so he turned the pistol and put it into the micro wormhole. He looked at Ziking behind him. Ziking looked at Chen Tao, met his gaze, pursed her lips and smiled. Chen Tao nodded slightly, walked to Ziking, and said, "Let's go, it's too boring, let's go outside." Ziking hummed. Chen Tao walked forward, Ziking took Chen Tao's arm, and the two left the Red Dragon bar together. After being messed up by Zhang Lin, Chen Tao and Ziking were not in the mood to stay here any longer. Looking at the backs of Chen Tao and Ziking leaving together, everyone watched quietly. It seemed that they were a little bit unable to recover. After leaving the Red Dragon bar, Chen Tao accompanied Ziking walking on the dark street. Chen Tao felt Ziking getting closer and closer, and her little head rested on Chen Tao's shoulder. Chen Tao came back to his senses and looked at Ziking beside him. Ziking leaned on Chen Tao's shoulder with a smile on her face. Seeing Ziking's expression change, Chen Tao said softly, "I killed a lot of people this day, you saw all those scenes, and I didn't want you to see those scenes." Ziking smiled and said, "Husband, you did nothing wrong. I think those people deserve to die." She looked at Chen Tao and said, "It's just that their power has occupied our slums for too long, and few people can provoke them. Husband, you do this, you are a real hero. And those scenes, Ziking has gotten used to it. Get used to it." Chen Tao was silent for a while, raised his hand and gently hugged her shoulders. Chen Tao was born in a slum, an ordinary person. Maybe he is worse than ordinary people, because he is poor. He struggles between life and death every day, fearing that he will die inexplicably while sleeping. Because he has been in the slum for a long time, Chen Tao has developed an instinct of forbearance. In the face of bullying and coercion from others, he can only accept it, run away or endure it. Because he always feels that he is inferior to the other party. But recently, Chen Tao has become the most powerful person in the world. Unconsciously, in his eyes, the lives in this world seem to be like grass and worthless. Killing people casually seems to become arbitrary, as if it is reasonable. Indeed, it is reasonable. Chen Tao is the most powerful person in the world. If he decides that someone should die, that person should die. However, Chen Tao feels that he has changed a lot, so much that he feels a little abnormal. Although the power of killing is strong, Chen Tao feels that it is not good to be like today. Chen Tao accompanied Ziking back home. The house in the slums is very small, and the living room is very small. Both of them feel a little crowded. Not to mention the bedroom. Ziking looked at this small house, she looked at Chen Tao, and said with a smile, let's go back to base no 1. Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Ziking, "Are you going back so soon?" Ziking nodded slightly and said, "Well, I want to go back. This is our previous home, but now our home is over at base number 1. That is our new home. It feels a little too crowded here now. Let's rest. Let's go back to our new home to rest." Looking at the innocent smile on Ziking's face, Chen Tao also smiled, raised his hand, gently stroked her hair, and said, "Okay." Chen Tao's mind moved, and the two returned to Chen Tao's bedroom. The bedroom was very spacious. Looking at this familiar bedroom, Ziking leaned close to Chen Tao's face and kissed Chen Tao's cheek. She looked at Chen Tao and smiled and said, "I'll go take a shower first, wait for me. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 188. Girls like to be clean, and Ziking is no exception. Whether she has taken a bath today or not, she always plans to take a bath as soon as she gets home. Chen Tao looked at Ziking's back and watched her figure disappear in front of the bathroom door. Chen Tao retracted his gaze and walked to the sofa and sat down. Sitting in this spacious bedroom, Chen Tao felt much better. Although Ziking's room has a nostalgic feeling, it is indeed too crowded. Getting used to living in base number 1, and then letting Chen Tao get used to the bedroom in the slums, this is a bit difficult for Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at this bedroom. Base number 1 is very large, and there are many bedrooms in this huge base number 1. Each girl has her own bedroom, and they usually rest in their own bedroom. Unless they want to do something intimate with Chen Tao, they will come over on their own initiative. Of course, if Chen Tao wants, Chen Tao can also take the initiative to invite them, and they will not refuse Chen Tao. Chen Tao sat on the sofa, turned on the screen, and looked at the other girls through the screen. It was a bit late at this time, and most of the girls were sleeping. Chen Tao was brewing tea by himself, then he picked up the teacup and took a sip. Not long after, Chen Tao heard footsteps. Chen Tao came back to his senses and saw a scene that made his eyes light up slightly. Ziking came out and she changed her clothes. She was wearing a thin white tank top with a black denim skirt, black stockings wrapped around her slender and straight legs, and a pair of black cylindrical shoes under her feet. She looked sexy and perfect. Looking at Ziking in front of him, Chen Tao blinked. The music started at this time. Ziking danced slowly to the music, twisting her waist and dancing enchantingly. Her slightly curly ink-like long hair fluttered with her movements. The passionate music, coupled with Ziking's moving dance, made Chen Tao's eyes light up. The more passionate the music, the more passionate Ziking's dance became. Ziking had a charming smile on her face, and her frown and smile were enough to make men's hearts stop beating. A piece of music stopped. Ziking also slowly stopped her steps, and Chen Tao came to Ziking unconsciously. Ziking slowly snuggled into Chen Tao's arms, looking at Chen Tao with expectation in her big eyes, and a faint smile on the corner of her mouth. Chen Tao also smiled, and he stretched out his hand and hugged Ziking horizontally in his arms. Ziking hooked her hand around Chen Tao's neck and looked at Chen Tao with big eyes. Chen Tao walked towards the bed with Ziking in his arms. Ziking closed her eyes, and her little head rested on Chen Tao's shoulder, but her face was slightly red. Got on the bed. The two cherished every minute and every second they were together, enjoying the warmth. The next morning, a ray of sunlight shone into the house from the window. Chen Tao slowly opened his eyes, looked at the ceiling, and turned his face to the side. Seeing Ziking lying next to Chen Tao with her eyes closed, her cheeks were still slightly red, and the corners of her mouth were slightly raised, revealing a happy smile. Seeing this scene, Chen Tao couldn't help but smile. He turned slightly, looked at Ziking, and gently stroked her cheek. Seeing that she didn't wake up, Chen Tao leaned close and kissed her forehead. Ziking was very obedient. She let Chen Tao do almost everything, and everything she did was for Chen Tao. How could Chen Tao not love such a girl? She was too tired yesterday, and Chen Tao didn't disturb her. He let her rest more if she could. Chen Tao tiptoed out of bed, put on his clothes, and walked towards the dining room on his own. Entered the dining room. Master number 1 smiled when he saw Chen Tao. Chen Tao nodded slightly. He entered the dining room and sat down at the dining table. After a while, the maids brought various foods to the dining table. Without Chen Tao's order, they have already prepared for Chen Tao. This is the special ability of these maids. They can judge when Chen Tao wants to eat, and then satisfy Chen Tao's needs when Chen Tao needs it. Chen Tao took the knife and fork and cut the steak quietly. Husband. At this time, Chen Tao understood Katie's voice. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and said, "What's wrong?" "People from the outer universe came and said they wanted to talk to us." Katie's voice sounded slowly. Chen Tao frowned and said, "What to talk about?" Katie said, "These people are from Bishi's universe. I guess they are planning to live in our universe. I guess they are planning to negotiate." Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and said, "What do you think?" "It depends on the number of people and the conditions they will agree to," Katie said. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and said, "Okay, then I'll go over and take a look after dinner." Chen Tao didn't want to participate in this kind of thing, but Katie would definitely participate in this kind of thing. It is very likely that Katie and Bai Yao will need to face each other. Bai Yao didn't care, but Chen Tao didn't want Kati to get into trouble. If you want Kati to be safe, then Chen Tao must be there. After all, the current dragon civilization is not strong enough to control the forces from the outer universe. So, you have to go. After Chen Tao finished breakfast, he stood up, looked at number 1, and said, "If Ziking looks for me, you can say that I'm going to the dragon civilization to do something." Number 1 nodded and said, "Okay, master." Chen Tao's figure disappeared on the spot. When he appeared again, Chen Tao's figure appeared beside Kati. As soon as he arrived beside Kati, Chen Tao found that Kati was in the previous room. Chen Tao looked at Kati, and Kati noticed Chen Tao, and she said, "This way." Chen Tao's sight followed the direction Kati was looking forward. There was a picture in front, and in that picture it was in space. In space, there was a woman standing. This woman had a pair of pure white wings. This pair of wings was not like the dragon wings of the dragon man, nor were they feather wings, but a pair of flesh wings, pure white and translucent, and even the white bones inside could be seen. The woman had long white hair, which was naturally draped over her shoulders. Her skin was white as bones, pale. But her figure was perfect, and her waist was grasped, and the range of her upper body was probably comparable to Ziking. A pair of slender and straight legs, and there was nothing to say about her figure. She had a delicate face, narrow and long dark purple eyelashes and a pair of dark purple gem-like eyes. Behind her, there was a pure white tail, which looked like a devil's tail. Of course it's not black, it's like her wings, it's translucent pure white, and you can vaguely see the bones inside. This is the alien who wants to talk to us and calls herself the White Jade King. Kati looked at Chen Tao and said. Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "Then let's talk to her." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 189. Okay, Katie responded. Chen Tao raised his hand and opened a miniature wormhole. Chen Tao couldn't afford to enter the micro wormhole, and Kati and Bai Yao followed. The three of them appeared again, in space. Chen Tao saw the woman. Looking at her up close, Chen Tao found that this woman looked very nervous. The woman wears a close-fitting silver armor that perfectly fits her proud figure. Under her long pure white hair, she has exquisite facial features. Her skin was pale, but delicate and smooth. The most important point is, Chen Tao found that the proportion of this woman was very small. Her figure is impeccable, but her overall proportions are twice smaller than those of ordinary people. She looks like a little Lolita with a proud figure. Her dark purple eyes were like a pair of gems. After she saw Chen Tao and the others appeared, her eyes passed over the faces of Bai Yao and Katie, and finally landed on Chen Tao. King Bai Jade looked at Chen Tao and said, "I heard that there is a strong person in this small universe who has the creation gene. Is that you?" Hearing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. He crossed his arms across his chest, looked at the woman, and said, "This is not important." When King Baiu heard this, she said, "No, this is very important. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't need to be like this at all." Katie on the side frowned and said, "You mean, if it weren't for Chen Tao, you could directly invade our small universe, right?" The White Jade King looked at Katie and said coldly, "That's right." Katie shook her fist. King Bai Jade noticed Katie's expression, and she said calmly, "Don't worry, even if we invade, the resources we need are different from the resources you are using. The resources we take will not affect your development. If you are worried about the balance of the universe, please be at ease. We, the White Jade civilization, yearn for peace and don't like war." As she spoke, the tail behind King Baiyu swayed slightly, but she was still looking at Chen Tao. It seemed that in King Baiyu's eyes, among the three, only Chen Tao was qualified to talk to her. Katie said calmly, "Everyone can make empty promises. How do you want us to believe you?" When King Bai Jade heard this, she turned her face to look at Katie. She said, "Negotiation is based on trust. If there is no trust in the negotiation, it is just like talking in vain. However, you can rest assured that when facing a person with the creation gene, our White Jade civilization will not be stupid to violate what you said." Katie was slightly startled. Her eyes fell on Chen Tao. What White Jade King said is indeed reasonable. Chen Tao's strength is before them. If Chen Tao is willing, he can completely erase anyone who enters this universe. King Bai Jade's eyes fell on Chen Tao, and she said, "The creation gene, that is the gene of God. Anyone who can possess this gene is a god." The White Jade King looked at Chen Tao and said, "If you are willing, I can make the entire White Jade civilization swear allegiance to you." Is the entire White Jade civilization loyal to Chen Tao? Katie and Bai Yao never expected that King Bai Jade would actually say such words. This was too exaggerated. King Baiyu actually plans to be loyal to Chen Tao? And it still brings an entire civilization with it. Chen Tao looked at the lowly shaped king in front of him and said, "How are you going to be loyal to me?" The White Jade King looked at Chen Tao and said, "Whatever you say is what it is. We, the White Jade civilization, will never resist you." Chen Tao crossed his arms across his chest and looked at the noble, cold, and arrogant Loli in front of him. This woman has the body shape of a Lolita, but her aura has not weakened from the beginning until now. A king's aura has always enveloped her. With such an aura, she is undoubtedly the king. Although petite, it feels unattainable. Now Chen Tao wants to make sure of one thing. When this woman said she wanted to be loyal, was she sincere? Is it just to get the right to live in this universe, so I am temporarily loyal? To determine this matter, Chen Tao has a way. He looked at the Lolita in front of him and said, "You tell me, you will do whatever I want you to do." Yes. Bai Yawang looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at Bai Jade King's slender and elegant figure and said, "Do you have a partner?" When King Bai Jade heard this, her eyes glowed with luster, and she shook her head expressionlessly, "No." Chen Tao said, "Then I want you, what do you think?" Katie on the side was startled, and she looked at Chen Tao. The expression on the White Jade King's face did not change at all. She lowered her head slightly and said, "As long as you agree to let the entire White Jade civilization live in this civilization, then I will be your property." Seeing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. In other words, she means it. Chen Tao looked at Katie. Meet Katie's gaze. When Katie saw this, she also understood what Chen Tao meant. Using this method, King Bai Jade must follow Chen Tao. As the king of the White Jade civilization, being controlled by Chen Tao, naturally, the people of the White Jade civilization would not dare to do anything out of the ordinary. Katie nodded slightly. Chen Tao's judgment was correct. Katie looked at the White Jade King and said, "How many people are there in the White Jade civilization?" King Jade said, some time ago, many civilizations suffered huge damage in order to compete for cosmic resources. Our White Jade civilization likes peace and hates war, but unfortunately we were involved in wars. We suffered less damage, but we also paid a huge price. Some people were lost later when they crossed the rift in the universe, and now there are only more than 100 million people left. More than 100 million people. More than 100 million people are actually not that many. You must know that in this universe, on a planet with intelligent life, there are more than 2 billion people at every turn. However, the universe here is different from the universe where the White Jade King lives. The technology of the universe where the White Jade King lives is too advanced. The energy that these more than 100 million people can produce is estimated to be enough to affect the balance of the entire known universe. Katie said lightly, if you don't affect the balance of our universe, we can accommodate you here. Of course, this is without affecting the balance of the universe. If you do anything extraordinary that affects the balance of the universe, if anything happens, we will let Chen Tao drive you all out of our universe at any time. King Biu said, thank you, as long as you are willing to let us stay in this universe, we will be grateful enough. Okay, Katie nodded slightly and said, from now on, you will be Chen Tao's property. At the same time, as the king of the dragon civilization and the king of the balance of the universe, Katie, allow you to stay here. Universe. Bai Jade King nodded slightly, and her eyes fell on Chen Tao. She closed her eyes and muttered, my name is Baiyu, and I am a member of Baiyu's civilization. I swear by this name. Baiyu becomes Chen Tao's possession. His orders are my wishes, and his wishes are mine everything. Chiang, there was a soft sound. A white light lit up on Bai Jade King's neck, and the light turned into a collar. The collar locked her neck, and a chain was formed. The chain was suspended in mid-air, and the other end appeared in front of Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at the chain, raised his hand and shook it subconsciously. Baiyu frowned. Suddenly the chain slowly disappeared, leaving only the white collar around Baiyu's neck. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 190. Chen Tao looked at his hand. The chain he was holding just now was gone, but Chen Tao could feel that there was something connected between him and Baiyu. It's a strange feeling. This is... Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, and it felt like he was connected to the weapons of the half-moon blade. He looked at his hands and felt that he could control the white jade and manipulate the white jade as if it were a material substance. What exactly is that? Chen Tao looked at Baiyu and said, that is. Baiyu looked at Chen Tao and said, this is the contract to recognize the master of our universe. With this contract, then I am yours. So decisive? As soon as she saw Katie letting them move in, she signed a contract with Chen Tao directly. Isn't she afraid that Katie and Chen Tao will regret it? Baiyu had a small face with a pair of eyes like black gems. She looked at Chen Tao, her eyes glowing with a hint of luster. From her sincere eyes, Chen Tao could not see any suspicion of others. She seemed to have only trust in Chen Tao. Just as Ruo Baiyu said, facing Chen Tao, she seemed to have no choice but to trust Chen Tao, because she had no means to blackmail Chen Tao. The only thing she could do was to pray for Chen Tao's mercy. Chen Tao said, I understand, you come with me first. When Baiyu heard this, she nodded slightly, spread her wings behind her, and flew to Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at Katie and said, I have created a galaxy before. There is a planet in that galaxy that can be inhabited by life. There is no life living there yet. I plan to give that planet to Baiyu and the others. You see how? Katie nodded slightly and said, okay. Chen Tao said, then I will take her there first. Good. Everyone's figures disappeared into thin air. When they appeared again, everyone appeared on a planet. Katie saw the galaxy below, her eyes glowed with luster, She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Is this, the Earth star?" Bai Yao shook his head, "No, look over there." As he spoke, Bai Yao looked at the stars not far away. Chen Tao looked at the planet below. This planet, and even the entire galaxy, were created last time to prove to Bai Zi that Chen Tao had the ability to program planets. This galaxy is almost the same as the one where Chen Tao is located, both in terms of number of planets and size. After all, it was Chen Tao who copied the data code of Earth star and wrote it. The only difference is that the star of the galaxy where the Earth star is located is the Sun, and the Sun is in its prime. And the stars in this galaxy are in their infancy. Young stars emit less light than mature stars. In order to allow the planets to have life, Chen Tao deliberately shrunk the orbits of the planets inward. Therefore, the impact of childhood and adulthood has become less significant because of Chen Tao's changes. The planets here are somewhat similar to the Earth stars, but the stars on the Earth side are in their prime, while the stars here are in their infancy, Bai Yao said. Katie also noticed it, and she nodded slightly. Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, "Did you program this by imitating the arrangement of galaxies on the Earth star?" Chen Tao hummed, answering Katie's question. He looked at Bai Yu beside him. Bai Yu's big eyes were looking straight down, looking at the blue, green, and white living planet below. Her eyes were shining slightly. Noticing Bai Yu's expression, Chen Tao said, "After that, you can settle all your civilized people on this planet. This planet is suitable for intelligent life to live. You should be able to adapt." Bai Yu nodded slightly and looked at Chen Tao, "Then I will make arrangements now." Chen Tao looked at Katie and Bai Yao and said, "Then the matter here is settled. You can cooperate with Bai Yu to stabilize the situation." Katie and Bai Yao looked at each other, then looked at Chen Tao and nodded slightly. Chen Tao looked at Bai Yu and said, "Remember not to cause trouble. You have to protect Katie and Bai Yao. Do you understand?" Bai Yu looked at Chen Tao and said, "Master, don't worry. Bai Yu's civilized people don't like war. If others don't take the initiative, we will not attack. This time we come to the Master's universe, we have no choice but to do so." Hearing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and said, "We have no choice. Why do we say it is no choice? I remember someone said that although your universe has exploded, there is more than just our small universe next to your universe. Why? Why don't you go to other small universes? This is a problem." Bai Yu looked at Chen Tao and said, "There is a cosmic gap between the small universe and the small universe. In the gap of the small universe, space turbulence will appear at any time. If you are involved, you will basically die. In addition to space turbulence, there will also be the ferocious beasts of the universe cannot be defeated by the technology of our white jade civilization. They like to eat creatures with flesh and blood. We initially targeted the closest small universe to you, and have lost many people on the way." Bai Yu said, "When we came here, we heard the news that there is a creation gene here. If we give up here and find another small universe, we probably won't be able to see the next small universe, and our people will be swallowed up by the turbulence of space, or they will become meals for the vicious beasts of the universe. So, we are forced to do this out of necessity." Hearing this, Chen Tao finally understood. So that's how it was. No wonder Bai Yu knew that Chen Tao was in this small universe, but he still dared to come. Chen Tao's eyebrows were slightly relaxed, and he said, "Okay, then the matter is resolved. I will go back first, and I will leave this to you three." Chen Tao looked at Bai Yu, then looked at Kati and Bai Yao. Kati nodded slightly. Chen Tao's figure disappeared on the spot. Chen Tao can come to help the dragon civilization with some things, but he doesn't intend to participate in the boring things later. After helping with these things, Chen Tao left. Watching Chen Tao's figure leaving, Kati's eyebrows were slightly relaxed. After dealing with Bai Yu's affairs, Chen Tao returned to base number 1 to live a leisurely life. It was the morning of the third day. The biological clock in Chen Tao's body made Chen Tao open his eyes on time. Chen Tao slowly got up and sat up, leaning against the head of the bed, and his side turned, and he saw a beautiful figure. The beautiful figure was sitting in front of the dressing table, combing her hair with a comb. She was wearing a white gauze dress with gold edges. She sat on the dressing table, her waist was tight and her shoulders were slender. Her skin was as white as cream. From Chen Tao's angle, he could see her proud figure and beautiful face. The woman seemed to feel something and looked at Chen Tao. Their eyes met. The woman showed a beautiful smile and said, "Awake." Her gentle and elegant voice was noble and dignified. This woman was Katie.